What's the worst way you've seen a person self-destruct in court? I took my ex to court because she had used my social security number to sign up for cable. I found out about it when she stopped paying for the service. She screwed herself over by just being herself. We showed up to court, I turned in the contract from the cable company, showing my social security number and her own name signed on the contract. She didn't even try to forge my signature. She signed her own name in and tried to deny that she'd had any part in it. The judge tore her apart, and it was nice. Represented a guy that stole 3 trucks from his work. Only 2 were recovered before trial. He showed up to a motion hearing in the 3rd one. I'm doing landlord-tenant cases, and my client was facing eviction over non-payment, but the client was withholding rent payments because of habitability issues in the department. No heat, high lead levels, vermin. This is going to be an easy win for me. I told my clients continually to make sure they don't spend the money, keep it but don't spend it. Because if you showed the judge you still have the money, it looks really good for you in terms of making the judge believe that you're withholding for good reasons. We get up in front of the judge, the landlord doesn't have an attorney, so I'm dancing inside. There's no way I can lose. I make my arguments and the landlord makes his. Judge asks my client if they still have the money. The client goes, "Nah, I blew that crap at the casino last week." My wife is the lawyer. When children reach the age of majority, if they don't continue studying and start working, it's not necessary to pay alimony. My wife's client found a new lover, which unleashed the wrath of the ex-wife, who started asking for more alimony for her children. Well, to win the case, it was necessary to prove that the children were working, but they could not get any proof of it. There was not much chance of winning, but they still went to court hoping that with the interrogations, they could find information that would put them in evidence. On the day of the trial, the children did not go, only the mother and her lawyer were present. The judge said, "Madam, tell me why your children couldn't come." The mum said, "They couldn't get permission from work." The judge and mother stared at each other for about a minute in awkward silence. Then the judge said, "Well, that was fast." I should note that the topic of this story grouping was, what was the worst way you saw a person screw over someone else in court? But so far, every single story I've read has been clients self-screwing. But don't be surprised if the original context rears its head at some point. I had a client who was trying to get away from a psycho ex and filed for a restraining order. He shows up to the final hearing and is making a big fuss about a truck they brought during their marriage. He said it was just his and she had no rights to it because their marriage was void. I asked him on cross-examination what he meant by that, and he said that he had already been married in another state when he married my client. He said that my client had no idea, but that it means that their marriage is invalid and the truck was all his. Not only is that legally inaccurate, the transcript of the hearing was promptly turned over to the police, who were actively investigating him for bigamy. Oh, and the judge gave my client the truck along with a 2-year no-contact order. A friend kept meticulous records of how much time his estranged wife spent with their daughter. He used pink highlighter for mum and blue highlighter for himself. Mum sailed into arbitration demanding full custody and handsome child support and the house. Dad pulled out 3 years' worth of year-long calendars. Mum had spent less than a full month with the child in 3 years. I can tell you she wasn't happy with the outcome. This might be a dumb question, but how are the calendars verified to be true? You'd be surprised. Not divorce-related, but a previous co-worker, we're civil engineers, had a case where the only thing that made it not a he-said-she-said situation was that he kept a phone log with short summaries of what was decided. It was basically, "He's got a log that he's willing to swear by was written the day of the call that says you approved this change. Do you have anything to the opposite?" I'm a lawyer. I saw someone screw themselves. I work as a public servant in a criminal law judge's office, and since I have a law degree, I don't normally do administrative work, though I get to be with the judge in some of the hearings. Last month we had a huge substance trafficking case. I'm talking about 20 or more people involved, months of investigation, undercover agents, videos, audio, the whole ordeal. The hearing lasted 3 days. Anyway, when it was time for one of the defendants to be on the stand so the prosecutor could read the charges he was accusing him of, he was pleading not guilty, as he very loudly stated from the majority of the hearing up until my boss, the judge, told him to shut up or he would be admonished, to which he replied, "What are you going to do, arrest me?" Which, to be honest, was actually a bit funny. The prosecutor, as part of the facts of his case, told him that he was being accused of selling, trafficking, and carrying X amount of X substances, with the base of his operation being his house, where he lived with his partner. Mind you, said partner wasn't even in the hearing. She wasn't arrested or anything, as there was nothing tying her to the case. And the defendant said, "Wait up. I was the one selling the substances. She didn't do anything." His lawyer, a state-assigned public lawyer, facepalmed so hard it's actually recorded in the audio of the hearing. A witness for the plaintiff in a civil suit who was a co-worker of the plaintiff testified very strongly against the company and in favor of the plaintiff. I questioned her about bias towards the plaintiff, if they knew each other well and were friends, etc. She said no, just friendly co-workers, work friends at best. I pinned her to it. When I got a chance to cross-examine the plaintiff, she had no choice but to burn her witness's credibility because not only were they very close friends, but they'd become sisters-in-law just a few years before. No, they didn't have the same last name or anything, but I'd done my homework. I still don't get why people want to fight small bias by destroying their credibility, but it happens more than you'd think. I'm being sparse on the details here due to confidentiality, but I had a client who was accused of very nasty offenses at work. He had an alibi. He was at work where he was the boss. He had an employee who could absolutely vouch for his being there. I talked to the employee, and the employee confirmed this. It gets closer to the trial, around the time when I need to send an alibi notice, which is advance notice to the Crown so that they can investigate the alibi and determine whether or not it's true. But I'm being careful, so I call the employee up again. It turns out my client fired him in the interim, so the employee quite candidly tells me, the lawyer, "Oh yeah, he was definitely at work, but that's not what I'm going to say in court. Screw that guy, he's going down." I didn't call him as a witness or file the alibi notice. I still won the trial, but if I hadn't thought to call the guy or if he had been less candid, my client would have been screwed really bad. He would have been on the offender registry, had jail time, the works, completely innocent. Wait, he was the boss and stupid enough to fire his alibi witness before the trial? My God. From talking to the employee, I'm guessing he sorely deserved the firing. That said, people accused of crimes might not be the brightest, but even the smart ones often make some dumb mistakes. I mean, a lot of people with illegal content on their laptop get caught because they take their computer in to get fixed and don't think, hey, I'm handing off evidence of very serious crimes to a random stranger. The narrator is certain that due to both his inability to lie and tendency to immediately say the least appropriate thing in any given social context, he would end up in one of these stories if he ever did a serious crime, and then maybe someone will narrate my court case on this channel. Too many criminal client situations to count of them screwing themselves over. One of the very few family law cases I handled as a young attorney sticks out to me though. A young woman and a young man have a child. The young woman seeks divorce from young man because he enjoys the thug life. He had recently been arrested and charged for possession with intent to distribute crystal, a felony, and in possession of a firearm, unlawful carry. The young man doesn't like her leaving him. He hires a local big-name top divorce attorney, granted very rural area, gets a temporary divorce order entered saying she can't have overnight male guests. This is actually more common than you would think in conservative areas. I think it's mostly a thing of the past in more urban places. The young woman starts seeing someone new. The young man is very upset about this. He has his fancy lawyer ask for a hearing, accusing her of violating court order and seeking full custody on top of attorney fees. The young woman, on advice from a mutual friend, hires me for this hearing. I sit down with the opposing counsel, and she's basically trying to strong-arm me with her experience and lays out egregious terms. The mother must not only give up her primary custody, but must have visitation with a supervisor and pay child support and attorney fees. She knows I'm a new baby attorney in town, fairly certain that I'd been licensed for less than a year. I balk, and she says she'll see us in court. I go into the hearing with a copy of his probation arrangement with his possible intent to sell and unlawful carry. He hasn't even told his attorney about this, and she is unaware. She calls him up and establishes how my client had her new boyfriend over on X, Y, and Z nights. The judge is very conservative and not pleased about this. Then the opposing counsel passes the witness. I ask him if he has a job. No. What do you do for money? Things here and there. Oh? Miss opposing counsel is awfully expensive. Do you sell crystal? What? Have you ever sold substances to make ends meet? No. Introduces a copy of his guilty plea and straight probation sentencing. The judge is now staring daggers at him. I lean over to my client sitting next to me and whisper, "If you took a substance test today, be honest, would you be completely clean?" She says yes. I ask the young man, "When was the last time you did crystal?" His attorney objects, but the judge overrules. I know this judge will do substance tests on people on the spot, as he's also the misdemeanor substance court judge. It's been years, I'm clean now. So if you were tested, you'd be clean? Yes. The opposing counsel asks the same of my client, and we agree. The judge has them both tested. The guy tests positive for crystal. My client is clean. The judge denies his motion and asks me to send in new temporary orders where the young man is required to maintain employment and start paying child support, and places the man on supervised visits. Icing on the cake, the opposing counsel actually calls me and leaves me a voicemail congratulating me on, and I quote, handing her butt to her for the first time in a very long time. That last part is nice. Your opponent didn't take it very personally and even showed respect. Nice. I've probably been very lucky in my career that very few opposing counsel, be they for the state or in minor civil matters, I try to avoid civil these days though, take things personally with me. I'm a very jovial guy and I try to get to know them over the course of cases. There is one prosecutor I currently have cases with where we may argue cases and issues, but between being before the bench, we share our respective latest cool D&D moments. We both DM games. Just recently, he and I had one of our last cases on the docket and we were discussing said sessions, and the judge had to interrupt us and say, "If I could get you nerds to stop for a second and do this motion, that'd be nice. I'd like to go to lunch." Huh, the laughs were had. Lawyers that take things personally or get personal with opposing counsel are crappy lawyers and don't belong in the profession. But that's just my opinion, man. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This was a case another prosecutor in my office had a few years back. A 30-year-old defendant was charged with the unspeakable act after he got his girlfriend's sister pregnant. She actually kept the baby, so the police just waited and got a paternity test. No surprise, defendant was the father. Defendant wanted probation. Prosecutor refused to offer it. He decided to plead guilty and have a jury trial on punishment. Here in Texas, you can choose to have the jury set the punishment. Evidence mostly proceeded as expected. The victim testified to having consensual, aside from being old enough to consent, whoopee with the defendant, getting pregnant, among other things. Paternity test was introduced. The defendant took the stand. His version of events was that he snuck into the victim's room at night, covered her mouth, and held her down while he committed the unspeakable act. It seemed like his own lawyer had no idea that that's the story he was going to go with. The jury deliberated for about 15 minutes before returning a verdict of 17 years. The maximum possible charge was 20. When interviewed by the attorneys afterwards, one of them said they decided on 17 years so the defendant would never forget the age of consent in Texas again. So a group of friends and I rented a 5-bedroom house in college. And being the group of guys we were, we partied pretty hard and were really rough on the house. We knew going in we were not getting our deposit back. Well, partway through living there, the septic started to have some problems. Whenever someone used the downstairs shower, it would drain pretty slowly, basically filling up the basin as you used it. Also, one of the room's carpets would get wet, so we emailed the property service to fix it. 2 weeks later, they sent out a plumber to snake the line and leave. Well, that didn't fix it, so we emailed again. 2 to 3 weeks, plumber, snake, leave. Still not fixed, email, and about 2 to 3 weeks and they scoop the line. Turns out roots had grown into the line, so they had to do a big old process to completely remove all the roots. Now it's fixed. Well, we all move out and go our separate ways. One of my buddies goes to Australia for 9 months. When he gets back, he comes home to a bunch of voicemails. Turns out the property company is coming after us for like $5,000 on top of the deposit. They tried to pressure him into either paying the money or he'd be taken to court. He told them he'd see them in court. For the couple of months leading up to the court date, he'd get calls telling him to pay and it would all go away. The day before the first day of court, they call him and tell him to pay $2,000 and give them info for one of the other people living on the original lease. He says to go to heck and see you in court. The first day of court is just to make sure everyone knows and to schedule the actual case. The lawyer for the property company shows up, is scrambling to figure out what's going on. He had no records beyond the original lease, which changed a couple of times as people moved in and out. My buddy helps him out by giving him copies of the multiple emails that we sent them to fix the septic and the damage it did to the house. Told my buddy he'd let us know how they wanted to proceed, and we never heard from the company again. Gotta love a justice against crappy landlord story. Keep records of your interactions with the people who own your property and photos, folks. You never know when they'll help you. Someone I knew had a pro Dio case where she had to defend a person who had been charged with a criminal offense. I don't know what, confidential and, Even though the police and DA could pretty much pinpoint the crime to her client, there was no evidence to tie him to the crime. Circumstantial at best. She'd instructed him to shut up and let her do the talking during the trial. As from experience, the client sometimes doesn't know how to answer a question properly. She pleads and can show that the court has nothing on her client. She feels that for once, a pro Dio case is going her way. After her plea, the judge thanks her for her plea and turns to the client. He asks if the client's had something to add to the plea. The client looks at her, back at the judge, tears well up in his eyes, and he blurts out, "I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again." She threw her notes and everything else she had in her hands at the client, now convict apparently. She basically got screwed by her own client who screwed himself even worse. Well, not my story, but a prior boss's story. They had a drunk driver kills a car worth of people case at the time where they were a general practitioner. My boss was representing the family that got hit, of which only the father was alive, and wanted the college guy's drunk driving skin to be mounted on a wall. This was back before Facebook was commonly used in court proceedings and before tons of people realized that crap is too great for any attorney worth their weight in salt to pass up. So, the drunk driving college kid had managed to get the judge's sympathy during the first part of the hearing by saying he was sorry, haunted, and never going to drink again. This was going to ruin his life. The judge seemed to be eating it up. Then comes my boss, who immediately burns this kid's remorse story to the ground by showing numerous Facebook statuses and photos of them binge drinking, partying, and even joking about driving drunk from the date of the accident up until a night ago. The kid looked like he was being forced to swallow hot coals, and the judge was absolutely livid. Needless to say, the kid had to do way more than just apologize and be remorseful after that. My dad was the equivalent of a public defender decades ago. There was this guy that would get caught for being drunk in public lewdness, etc. every weekend. He seemed to draw the same judges and was pretty well known to everyone in the courthouse as an absolute lost cause. One of the regular judges had him appear in his court again. The judge is ready to give him a prison sentence because he was driving a car this time. But the guy starts crying that he finally got a job out of town and was trying to turn his life around. The judge tells him that as long as he never makes a mistake in my town again, he would just drop the charges. Well, sure as heck, this guy shows up the following Monday. Same judge, driving drunk again. My dad now has his case. The judge tells him he gave him his final chance, to which the guy sobs and replies, "I was leaving town, Your Honor, but my friend decided to throw me a going-away party." The judge was not amused. My dad had to do everything he could not to laugh. In short, perpetual drunk that drove, gets a chance to leave town and not face charges, but gets drunk at a going-away party in his honor, drives and goes to jail. Faced the same judge both times. I'm currently representing a sweet old lady on a case. I'll be sparse in details in case anyone figures out who I am. Long story short, this lady's neighbor convinces her that her house is basically unsellable, that her house requires all sorts of repairs, the repairs to the house would bankrupt her, and that she should just sell the house. To him. He shows up at her house the next day with documents to sign. She has no idea what's going on and doesn't read anything. She actually has an eye condition and signs everything. When she finally sees a lawyer to close the deal, he says, "What the frick, you can't do this." You see, the price of the transaction was about 36% of what the house was actually worth, and there weren't any repairs that needed to be done that would justify the price. Not kidding, it was stuff like fixing a faucet in the bathroom. Also, she didn't understand that she would have nowhere to live afterwards. The old lady thought she could just stay in the house until she died. To make matters worse, she's living off a modest pension and the other side is suing her for the house. They're essentially trying to get her to cave because her legal fees are getting exorbitant. I hate people. To answer a few questions. 1. We do have a lot in our favor, but there are a lot of steps to get to trial. By the time we get there, she's going to have to spend a lot of money. Money she doesn't have. 2. She has an eye condition. Uveitis, but it isn't bad enough to qualify as a defense, non est factum. At the time, she was driving. 3. She's a terrible witness. Her evidence is all over the place. When she was examined, deposed for you Americans, she denied being taken advantage of. That's not great for our position. 4. In Ontario, where I practice, contracts for purchase of real estate don't have to be notarized. This comes later, I just thought I'd provide a quick update. We literally just settled this afternoon, so my client can live in peace. In a little more debt than before, but nothing that will bankrupt her. As much as there are some evil lawyers in the world, I guess we do at least need a couple like this man or woman to do the good work in cases like this against evil exploitative monsters like the neighbor in this story. I was litigating a custody dispute on behalf of the mother in an incredibly conservative jurisdiction. One of the most common ways to get custody was to allege an addiction to adult content or just doing the deed, because the threshold for it was basically non-existent. For this hearing, however, we lucked out with the judge who I knew from other cases. Opposing counsel tried to gotcha me into settling before the hearing by showing me surprise messages of an adult nature between the mum and her new boyfriend. This is, of course, not law and order, and you can't introduce surprise evidence. So we go through the hearing, I object to the messages, but say I'd allow them to be read into the record in their entirety. So the uptight, very conservative local attorney gets to spend the next 25 minutes or so reading these messages in open court, occasionally asking if she could gloss over parts, but no, I didn't feel it would be appropriate to gloss over them as there's a woman's livelihood in the balance. I'll never forget hearing her struggle with certain words. They weren't even dirty. But this was like the third hearing we had to amend custody because this guy felt like his ex-wife having a boyfriend meant that she was an addict to doing the deed. They alleged the messages happened while the kid was in the mum's custody, but they based that on the timestamp of the screenshots. The timestamp on the texts was clearly at a time when the kid was not even around, and mum was safe to do the deed over the phone. The judge had heard enough of this bullcrap and awarded attorney's fees and put in the order, consistent with the vexatious litigant statute, that the dad would continue to be liable for her attorney's fees if he kept pushing this crap. It was the only joy I got from practicing family law. I sat on the jury of a man who was accused of very inappropriate behavior with children. He elected to testify in his own defenses, and his defense was, "I did it, but it was her idea." It was his third felony strike, so he'll be spending, with any luck, the rest of his life in prison. This wasn't court, but a live Portland traffic stop I was watching, and the guy told the officer, "I have caffeine pills in my back pocket," gets them out and puts them on the hood, and everyone's chill. The guy then just comes clean of its own accord and says it's Molly, and the officers look at each other and go, "Do we even have a test kit for that?" And the officer says, "No." The guy's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. Sitting waiting for my client, and the judge is giving a mass colloquy for an alternative program on a DUI, basically probation. The question was, has anyone consumed alcohol or taken drugs in the last 24 hours? The obvious answer aside, one guy proudly raises his hand. "I did smack last night." He did not get probation. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.